Hello and welcome everyone to MTRI's Wetland Week's Lunch and Learn. My name is Luca and I'm a research technician here at the Mersey-Tobiatic Research Institute, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we begin though, I would like to acknowledge that the MTRI is located in, and we are meeting from Keswick, one of the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq, home of the Mi'kmaq people. We acknowledge the treaties of peace and friendship, and we thank the Mi'kmaq for their generosity in sharing their homeland with us. Now, for anyone that may be joining us for the first time today, I would just like to give a little bit of background about what the MTRI is and what we do. The Mersey-Tobiatic Research Institute is located in Southwest Nova Scotia near the Kachimakujik National Park and National Historic Site, and we are a research-based nonprofit. Our mission is to conserve, promote, and sustain biodiversity in Keswick and beyond. Now, I would just like to introduce today's seminar speaker, John Gallop. John is a wetland and water resource specialist with the Nova Scotia Department of Climate Change and Environment and Climate Change. And today, John will be talking about wetlands in Nova Scotia and the province's efforts in mapping those areas using LiDAR technology. And yeah, it's great to have you, John. Before we begin with the talk, though, I would just like to remind everyone to keep your mics muted for the duration of the talk. If you do have any questions, please use the chat window on Zoom or on Facebook, wherever you're watching. And we will also have a dedicated question period in the end, where you'll be able to ask your questions live to John. And with this, I would like to hand over the seminar to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully this goes seamlessly. Okay, perfect. Right on. So can everyone see my screen? No?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. What about now?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Something is coming up.
Sorry, I should have probably practiced this before the presentation, but here we go. You can see it?
This looks great.
Okay, perfect. Right. Okay. So I would like to thank everybody for joining a Wetland Appreciation Week and joining MTRI and myself to discuss this exciting project that we have on the go and the wet area mapping that we have in the province. So before I start, I guess I'll just introduce myself first. My name is John Gallop. I am one of 2 wetland specialists for the province. I'm responsible for the wetland conservation policy, the implementation of the policy, and the management of the wetland program. I do a variety of things. One of them is, help produce this wet area mapping model, but I also, review environmental assessments. I provide expert advice to proponents, to conservation organizations, such as many of you that are on this call, and I help overview wetland compensation projects as well. And so I do a variety of different things. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about probably one of the most exciting things that I've been working on right now, which is the LiDAR-based Wet Area Mapping project for Nova Scotia and some of the field verification projects that we have on the go. So before we kind of dive into it, I'm just going to give you a little breakdown of, what we're going to talk about. So first we're going to talk about, what is wet area mapping? What can the tool be used for? And a little bit of overview, again, what the workflow is. And then we're going to talk about some of the field verification studies that we have on the go. And MTRI, they are Luca and Chad. They're actually doing some of the field work for Marina and myself. Marina's my colleague. And then we're going to talk about some of the limitations that the model has based on our studies. And then if there are any questions, I'm sure there will be, I'll be able to answer those. So let's start off on, what is wet areas mapping? Another term for wet areas mapping is the cartographic depth of water index. It's a geographical model or geospatial model that predicts essentially where wet areas will be, where water will accumulate. It's not exclusively a wetland layer, but it's, as the name suggests, it's a wet area map. It predicts where drainages might be, where water courses might be, or lakes, or wetlands. And if you guys are familiar with wet area type of mapping, it's a type of model that has been widely used across the country. Actually, like in Alberta, they have it, and we currently have a wet area map available on Provincial Landscape Viewer, which is a publicly accessible web interface. But it's a little outdated. This is using new technology. It's using LiDAR data, so light detection and ranging data, and it has a higher resolution and seems to work, quite a bit better. The model is topographically driven, so we don't use soil data as is. It's based off of the Earth's surface, so areas that are low, spots that are close to drainages and predicted streams, those will be predicted as wet. And then areas further away, higher slopes, those will be predicted as dry. The general workflow and method has been pioneered by Dr. Paul Arp at UNB. He is the one that really pioneered this type of research, and we've used his methods and also kind of modified it to make an improved model. And I'm kind of standing on shoulders with giants here. When I didn't really develop this model. It was actually Ian Bryson. He was the old wetland specialist, but he moved back to consulting. So he came up with the majority of the model, and then Marina and we took over and made some modifications, and then we're working on, hopefully eventually, distributing it, I guess, is the main goal. But right now we're just doing the research part. So what can this tool be used for? So it's really good at, like I said, identifying wet areas. So it's a great tool that we could use to identify where wetlands are, drainages, lakes, water courses. And what we're finding is that it's an extremely good tool at actually predicting unmapped wetlands. For example, treat swamps. Treat swamps are underrepresented wetland type within the province, like in the mapping, sorry. Typical wetland inventory maps, they're derived from aerial imagery. So treat swamps look like upland forests, essentially. And so they're missed a lot of the time. But this model does a really good job at identifying, where those essentially low spots are, where water will accumulate, and where, treat swamps are. It's also an excellent tool at, identification of intermittent and small streams. So from a fisheries perspective, if you're a fisheries biologist, I can see this being very useful if you're trying to find streams that might not be in provincial inventory. This type of tool could be a really good desktop screening tool. For example, like if you're an industry and you are trying to find locations of wind turbines, for example, you could maybe use this as an initial desktop screening tool. I can see it being very useful in conservation if you're looking to acquire land and you're trying to acquire land with wetland ecosystems. You could use that. And this is a tool that I currently use right now. I use it when I review environmental assessments and enforcement files. It's just one tool of many that I use to see if there's a weight of evidence suggesting that there may or may not be a wetland. It's also, I can see potential for this to be a stepping stone to developing a more robust wetland inventory. For example, you could use this with spectral imagery to come up with, we do be able to identify wetland classes and wetland types. And I also see a really good potential for species distribution models. So say you want to find out where canopy warbler is, this would be a really good tool that you could use in conjunction with canopy height models and vegetation inventory. And then another one which I have used in the past is, finding wetland restoration sites. It could be a really good screening tool. It can predict where water may accumulate, and you can use that in conjunction with land use data to determine where degraded habitats might be and where would be a good spot for wetland restoration. So the data set, it is currently available. It's a geodatabase. It's a raster data set. It's fairly large right now. We're going to try to find ways to make it less bulky and smaller so we can distribute it hopefully down the road. The geodatabase consists of the wet area mapping, which is what I just talked about, but as an intermediate step, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to create the wet area map, you have to create flow accumulation channels. So if you guys are familiar with
John,
landscape, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just having a little bit of issues with your microphone.
Okay.
Is it a computer-based microphone or are you wearing one?
Computer-based.
Okay.
Is it breaking out now?
No, it sounds fine now.
Maybe I'm just moving around too much.
I think it might be the movement.
Right.
Most of it was fine. It just wanted to check.
Perfect. Just stop me again if there's issues.
Okay. No, it sounds great now.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll just stop moving around. And then the other data set would be, flow accumulation channels, which is an intermediate data set. So if you look at Provincial Landscape Viewer, they have, there's also flow accumulation channels, which is predicted flow based off of LiDAR data. Oh, sorry. And the units in the raster data set, they're in centimeters. So it ranges from 0 to 43,000 centimeters and so, but the typical wet area values are usually within 0 to 50 centimeters. And so since, a picture is worth 1,000 words, here's just what the model looks like. So this is the model where I symbolize where the 0 to 50 centimeters are. So 0 to 50 centimeters is typically where you have your wet areas. That's usually where you have water at the surface or near surface. And the legends on the right is showing, the different values. And this is where you would potentially have your wet areas. This looks like a lake, and then there's potential drainages here, and then there's potential wetlands as well. Also, we'll talk about this later, but just to reiterate, this is a model. And so all models are wrong, but some are more valuable than others and will tell you something meaningful. And you always have to field verify this stuff. But from what I'm seeing, and Chad probably can mention as well, the model is doing a pretty good job at predicting where those wetlands are. So this is a simplified workflow. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the model, how it was developed, it was developed using publicly available LiDAR data available online, and we were able to download those tiles, and it was at a 1 meter resolution. Then we resampled to a 5 meter resolution and did something called hydro conditioning, where we just modify the visual elevation model a little bit. This model was completed on ArcGIS Pro, and also using an open source data or open source program called Whitebox. And so this type of stuff, anyone can really do it if you have, an Esri license, or if you want to just stay with open source data. This is something that can be completed on QGIS as well. I've completed the model several times before on that. So this is something that is available to most people. And so then we created what's called a digital elevation model, and then we create a slope raster, which is like a 3D topographical model of the surface. And then we create what we call flow accumulation. So they're predicted streams, and there's basic algorithms that you could use on ArcGIS, for example, such as the D8 algorithm, and that will predict where streams will be. And then we develop the depth of water index by using a least cost path algorithm. And so, again, this is an example of what the model will look like. So right now, here's the hill shade. So this is a 3-dimensional model of the Earth's surface. Blue is provincially mapped lakes. So then we go through the model, we create the flow accumulation line. So this is all these streams here. They're likely streams or drainages around the area, and then we use we develop the wet area map, and then we have this. So this shows, the low spots here. You can see the water accumulates, and so areas that are further away from predicted streams on higher slopes, they're likely not going to accumulate water, and it's coming up and it's dry in the map. So here's another example of what we could use, how you could use the model. So I'm marketing this as a wet area map, but it's really like a soil moisture index. So you could symbolize the data however you want. So for example, on the right, this is typically how I use it and how wetland practitioners will use the data set. But then on the left, you can reclassify the data to show where well-drained sites might be, or where the uplands might be. So I set the threshold 100 centimeters plus. So these are areas that are likely upland. And so, for example, this could be useful if, say, you're trying to study a species of orchid that grows exclusively in well-drained soils. You could use this in conjunction with, let's say, canopy height model or forestry inventory or climate data to come up with a species distribution model of, we'll say, this hypothetical rare orchid. Another thing you could use it for that I've seen other organizations use it is as a constraints map, say for a proposed wind project, and you wanted to know where the potential uplands are, you could use a data set like this, and you can make your buildable area like that. So there's many ways you could use it. Typically, it's used kind of the example on the right, but depending on what you're trying to do, you can symbolize the data however you want. Now let's dive into the actual. I was going to say fun stuff, but it's all fun. But the field stuff, the field aspect of this. So we have funding from Environment Canada, Climate Change Canada, and they gave us funding to complete field work for this project. And in turn, they have their own initiative. They're trying to develop the Canadian National Wetland Inventory, and so we're collecting data for our own purposes, but then we will be providing the data to ECCC to do whatever they want with it. And MTRI, like I mentioned, they are helping Marina and myself out on the fieldwork component because we're doing essentially a provincial-wide study, and so we need more boots on the ground. So some of the questions that we're trying to answer is, we know the model works, but how accurate is the model at predicting wetland boundaries? The other question we're trying to figure out is, how does soil texture influence optimal depth to water threshold? So before I mentioned, usually wetlands and wet areas are usually within the 0 to 50 centimeters threshold, but it is widely known that soil texture and superficial geology might influence those thresholds. So in some areas, it might be 0 to 30, in some areas 0 to 40. So it really depends, and it could vary based on soil texture. So we're going to try to answer that question. And then other opportunities I see is that potentially there could be soil data incorporated into the model if we're finding a strong correlation between texture and thresholds. And then there could be an opportunity for generating, enhancing, and improving a new wetland inventory down the road. So the basic design of the survey, like I said, it's province-wide, and we're focusing on all ecoregions. So we chose ecoregions as a good ecological unit because it's based off of similarities based off of superficial geology, climate, and vegetation structure. So the goal is to do a subset of plots within each ecoregion across the province. And then we're also trying to target likely wetland areas. So we're going to each ecoregion, typically close to roads and within crown land. We chose crown land for access reasons. And then we go to likely wetland areas. So we target areas that aren't just those linear features. Like I mentioned, that this is a wet area map, not just a wetlands map. So it predicts where drainages are and water courses. So we're targeting areas that are not those linear features, but the more like wider features, which are likely wetlands. Well, then we go to each site and then we collect a soil sample that will be processed in the lab. So we collect that, we collect soil sample at a depth of 0 to 15 centimeters and then 15 to 30. And then that is being shipped off for processing. And then we go to the site and then we, if it is a wetland, we do wetland boundary delineation. So it's just 100 to 200 meter transect essentially, where we're dropping waypoints every 5 meters along the boundary. And then we collect rapid assessment data. So that's characteristics of the wetland, which I'll talk about in a second here. And then we'll, as bonus data, we'll collect incidental rare species data, which can then be provided to ACDC and also be used to update our wetland of special significance layer. In everything that we're collecting, all the data, we're using ARC field maps. Everything is automated. It took a little while for Chad and I to troubleshoot some issues we had, but it's actually a very powerful tool to use. And it will definitely reduce transcription time and make things a lot more efficient. So if we find a wetland in the predicted wetland area, we collect variety data. We collect, wetland classification. We collect data on landscape position, the landform, vegetation structure. Is it treed? Is it shrub? Is it herbaceous? And then we use hydric soil, determine the hydric soil indicators using U.S. Army Corps methodology, and then do a little species inventory of the area, and then photograph or georeference photographs. And so this data that we're collecting, we will be providing this to Environment Climate Change Canada. And what we're trying to determine is, what is the optimal depth of water threshold for ecoregion and soil texture? Is it 0 to 30 for sandy soils versus 0 to 50 for clay soils? Trying to see if there's any correlation. And then we're trying to determine, what is the average depth of water pixel value at the boundaries. And from the studies that I've done for environmental assessments and this so far, it looks like, 0 to 50 is or 0 to 50 is like usually the range. And then this data that we collect, we're going to provide to ECCC for their model development. So this is just an example of the field data collected. This is something that Chad and I believe Luca collected the other day. And this, on the left hand, you can see this is the predicted wet area map, and then the red dots, those are the field verified wetland boundary. And as you can see, it's, maybe I'm biased, but it's pretty impressive conformance with wetland boundary and predicted boundary. And then we have the data forms that we're collecting. It's all automated drop down. So it gives you characteristics of the swamp, or that is the swamp, and then the soil type, hydric indicators, there's a high water table, water stained leaves, watermarks, and then dominant species. So this is a very powerful tool data that we could use for our purposes, but also for Environment Climate Change Canada, but also for if we want validation data for future wetland inventory data sets that we might develop in the future. So pros and cons of this so far, what we're seeing and what I've noticed, and after this talk, Chad can mention if you notice any other limitations, but so far, I think what I'm seeing is it's great at predicting locations of unmapped wetlands. So it's really good at identifying swamps. It's picking up on a lot of things that aren't in our current inventory. It's a great tool at just locating wet areas in general. So where water may flow, water courses, lakes. It's at high resolution, and it's a great improvement from the current wet area mapping that is available on Provincial Landscape Viewer and for download. And it's, I think there's great potential for this data set, as well as using spectral data and other data sets to create a more robust and specific wetland model. The cons for this is that it poorly predicts convex wetland systems. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't do a good job at identifying bogs. I made some corrections to the model to improve the accuracy, but there's still some limitations. So the reason being is that this model predicts where water will accumulate, but on the LiDAR data, a bog, it's domed, it appears to be a hill. So the model predicts that it's a dry hill. In reality, it is just deep peat, and it's a wetland. So that is one of the limitations, but I was able to incorporate the wetland inventory, the identified bogs in the inventory, and incorporate it into the model. And so it has improved the detectability of bogs, but it still has limitations. I was looking at Chad's data the other day, and I noticed that there was some bogs that were predicted as upland in the model. So it's a limitation to consider, but maybe it could be corrected using spectral data and other data sets. It tends to overpredict the size and shape of wetlands and it also tends to overpredict the connectivity. So based on how the model is produced, it's produced based off of flow accumulation lines. So everything is interconnected. In reality, that might not be the case. They might say that these wetlands are connected hydrologically when they're actually not. So that's another limitation. And then the other one that I've noticed is that optimum depth of water thresholds, whether it be 0 to 50 or 0 to 30, varies on geographical location and the geology and soil types in the area. So there's a limitation there. So really, to use this model, if you have ground truth data of a local area, it's always good to kind of calibrate the thresholds to determine what is the optimal threshold for your area. But typically 0 to 50 centimeters. And I just want to thank everyone for joining me and listening to me rant about the wet area project that we have on the go. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can.
Great. Thank you so much, John. That was a great talk. I really, really enjoyed that. We can now move on to the question period. So for anyone that would prefer to ask their questions live, feel free to just shout out your question right now. There's also a couple of questions in the chat here that I'll be reading in a bit. I might just start with one of the questions in the chat actually to break the ice.
Yeah.
So we've got one here from Wanda Baxter, and she's saying, in determining how accurate the mapping is, will it be useful to get feedback regarding wetlands that appear inaccurate? For example, Martins Brook floods extensively on a seasonal basis below Northwest Road and has a larger boundary year-round. I know this firsthand, but I don't see that represented, at least not as far as I can see. So yeah, the question would be, would it be useful to get feedback regarding wetlands that appear inaccurate?
Sure. Yeah, I would love that. Oh, compared to mapped wetlands, what's mapped and what's reality?
I believe that would be the question.
Yeah, no, that would be very very great, and I would love to hear about it.
Yeah. What would how would people how would they be able to share that information with you?
I can share an email to contact. I'll just do it in the chat. But awesome. It's our generic Wetlands Nova Scotia email. That way, if I'm away, Marina, my colleague, could answer it. I'll just send it right there. Wetlands@novascotia.ca.
That one sounds easy. Great. Okay, so we have another question here from John Hannaberry, and he is asking, how do you get the government to help? And also, how do you get the government to help a homeowner? He's wondering.
For what specifically? Yeah. If there's a wetland alteration on their property, or?
Yeah, John, it would be great if you could clarify what exactly you mean. That would be perfect.
And also feel free, John, you can also just email me at that email there, and we can talk offline if that's better.
Great. Chad, do you have any questions from your Facebook side? No questions from Facebook. Okay. Yeah, let's wait and see if John's gonna clarify his question. Yeah, there. Okay. John is saying, yeah. Okay, you seeing that, John?
Yeah. So you would contact your local environmental officer, and then then we're required to go to site and check out if it's being altered, and if it is, then there will be some enforcement measures in place. If you're feeling like you're not getting any response, again, I would contact me. Write me an email, that email there, and then I will forward it off to them and make sure that we'll get someone on site.
That's great. Yeah, John, if you heard that, worst case scenario, you can get in touch with John and he will forward the information. Jenigiri Jagadish has a question about the resolution of the map. What's the resolution of these maps?
5 meters.
5 meters.
So 5 meter resolution. So it's a raster, so they consist of little pixels, and it's at a 5 meter resolution. The LiDAR data that we took it from, or it's derived from, is 1 meter resolution, but we went to 5 meter resolution because we're creating a model for the province, and that's a lot of processing time and speed. So it's we decided that a 5 meter resolution would be a lot easier to work with, and we're not finding we're finding this very accurate.
I believe from how to access it, he's wondering as well. I believe Chad has shared the website already in the very beginning of the chat. Oh no, that's no. So Chad's gonna share the information here in a second, I think.
But how do we access the wet area map?
I believe, yeah. Is that what the question is, Chanagiri?
Well, we have this too. So we have the provincial landscape viewer. So Chad could share that, but that's just the old version. The one that I'm talking about, that is not available yet. We're currently in the field testing phase, but we do see. I don't have a timeline for you, but I'm hoping that it's in the near future where this will be readily accessible, either through a web viewer maybe, or for download, or both. But right now we're in the field testing phase. So unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for that.
Okay, and I have a question for you as well. You may have mentioned it already, but will this be freely available to the public? And for example, could students be using this for academic research?
Yeah, so the goal would be to have it readily accessible and available. I'm still working with management, and we're still in the field testing phase to understand the timeline. But we have in the past, even though it's not technically available, when I have provided it to academia and research scientists for certain projects and given them, little snippets of the project that they could use. So we have provided it on a request basis. You just have to sign a data sharing agreement. But the goal is eventually that hopefully it would be available to everyone. Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, we do have another question coming in here from Kevin McGugan. And the question is the flow accumulation calculated with a barrier breaching? And would a lack of a culvert in locations cause much issues at this scale?
Yeah, so we've hydro corrected it using a white box tool called it's like a least cost path breaching technique. So we don't know where the culverts are, but using that technique, I'm not finding huge issues. But that's something that, when we research it further, maybe there is, and maybe if we knew where the culverts were, it might be a little bit better. But we're finding that the breaching technique that we used works quite well.
All right, fantastic. And we do have one more question here from Chanagiri. And more from Chanagiri Jagadish. Sorry for butchering that. He's wondering if he can create a model based on this data and share that eventually.
Sure.
Yeah. Once it's available, Chanagiri.
Sorry. Just to clarify, you mean maybe like a wetland inventory using my current data that we have? I'm a little confused on.
Yeah, Chanagiri, if you want to kind of clarify a little bit what exactly you mean, and then we can get back to this question. Then we do have another one from Amy Gromack. She's asking, could you speak to how this data could be used to inform climate change adaptations? For example, better understanding preparing for droughts and floods.
Well, I think it could be used in identifying where those wetlands are. So you can identify potential where there's areas for potential for storm retention and flood mitigation. So I can see it being kind of a screening tool on where water might accumulate in areas, and then we could potentially that could be areas where you could protect in the future from development, so they can act as flood mitigation. So I think there are some opportunities to use this for that purpose.
Awesome. And then I'm seeing Ben Collison has got his hand up. So Ben, feel free to ask a question.
Hi, John. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was great. This past summer, I was out doing field work, some along the Eastern Shore and another bit in Southwest Nova. And one of the really interesting things we were studying along water courses, like streams, but not specifically targeting wetlands, is we were finding at culvert locations that probably between 25% and 30-40% of the culverts we were visiting had beaver dams in them. And so because beavers are creating structures inside of anthropogenic structures, being culverts under roads, was quite interesting to see. Like, I don't know if you would call them, I'm not a wetland expert, but like an artificial wetland upstream from an anthropogenic structure that a beaver had built a dam in. So I'm just wondering if, perhaps maybe that could be something to take into account for all of the field work that's ongoing for this model, maybe looking at how beavers are changing the landscape for wetland mapping and wet areas mapping. Just one thing that I thought of when I comment about culverts, because that was quite interesting.
That's actually a really good point. And to be honest, I didn't really consider that, but maybe I'll get Chad to go check out some beaver dams and see how the model compares to it. But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for that.
Okay, great. Yeah, do we have any other questions? Also, feel free to ask them, live in person, just like Ben just did. And Chad, there's nothing on your Facebook side of things? Nope. Okay, so if this is it for the questions, then I think we might wrap up here. So thank you so much, John. Thanks again. And yeah, John did share his email as well. So if you come up with any other questions, he sounded like he'd be more than happy to answer those. So thank you, John. Thanks for everyone else for joining us today. And I would also like to thank the region of Queens for making our seminars possible, as always. And you can stay up to date with our next seminars on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and you can also rewatch today's seminar and all other seminars we've ever had on our YouTube channels and on Facebook. And for our next seminar, that's happening on Thursday at 7 p.m., we're going to be joined by Rebecca Mader from Acadia University. And she'll be sharing her research on the effects of hemlock woolly delgid infestation in hemlock stands on the fungal community within those stands. So again, this seminar is going to be Thursday at 7 p.m. And thank you so much again, John. It was a great talk. Really enjoyed it. And the field work, it's such a promising model. Very exciting to be working on that. And
thanks everyone for joining. And again, thanks to MTRI for hosting this. And it was a pleasure talking and explaining this exciting model that we're working on. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. That's great. So have a good day, everyone. And I hope everyone stays well. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.